our components. So let's compare with the on-premises and we'll compare with the Azure infrastructure as well. So last week we have discussed, right? We can have a Windows virtual machine here and top of a virtual machine. Windows K12 R2 we can have, and top up of Windows machine we can deploy the Active Directory and DNS, right? AD and DNS we can deploy, and then all the machines, all the laptop, desktop, servers can be a part of that particular domain, right? So here main challenge here is like my Windows team is managing the Windows and Active Directory team is managing the Active Directory and DNS. Managing the Windows and AD team managing the AD and DNS part, right? So that particular concept, that particular infrastructure comes under infrastructure as a service. So the same infrastructure we can have on Microsoft Azure platform as well. So what you can do on Microsoft Azure? So this is Azure East US. We can have same infrastructure. Same infrastructure we can have into the Azure. We can deploy the virtual machine. We can have Active Directory. We can have DNS and all the laptop, desktops or servers can be integrated with the Active Directory. Again, same thing. Windows team will manage the Windows and AD team will manage the Active Directory and DNS. So this is the first scenario which we have discussed last week. Now today we are going to understand Azure Active Directory domain services, which is comes under PaaS. So when we deploy domain services, Active Directory domain services on Azure platform, Microsoft is going to deploy a Windows machine in the backend. So Microsoft is not going to provide any access on that particular Windows machine. Okay, Microsoft is going to provide only the console of the Active Directory. So what Microsoft is asking to do, Microsoft is asking to deploy a service. This is the service we need to deploy. Okay, and Microsoft is asking to deploy one virtual machine, and that virtual machine will act as a management server. So this is the normal machine with Windows 2K12, 2K12 or 2K16 or 2K19 OS, and top of that OS we need to deploy a management tools. So AD management tool, then DNS management tool, then group policy management tools. So all the management tools we need to deploy on that machine, and the machine needs to be joined into the Active Directory. So this is the AD, this is the Azure Active Directory domain services. The machine is getting joined into the Active Directory. So once you join that virtual machine into the Active Directory, you can consume, you can use a required services which we have configured into the Active Directory domain services, like group policy, like DNS, like Active Directory. So what is the benefit you will get here? We are not going to manage a Windows server. Just we are going to manage only the Active Directory, DNS and group policy part. Okay. Also backup, your performance, monitoring, everything done by Microsoft. That's why Microsoft is saying this is the PaaS service. This is the PaaS service. But there is a challenge, there is a limitation when you deploy, okay? When you deploy Azure Active Directory domain services, so Microsoft is not going to provide a full access on that particular directory service. Okay, you will get the domain level access and you can manage your infrastructure. Now, what is the next limitation? If you ask me, like I have on-premises infrastructure, with my Windows Active Directory, Windows 2K12, AD, DNS and everything. And I wanted to extend my domain controller. I wanted to extend my domain controller into the Microsoft Azure with the PaaS service, which is not possible. You can create a trust relationship between two domains, but you cannot extend the existing domain controller with the PaaS services. Okay, so might be Microsoft will release those features into the future, but in today's date, you cannot extend a existing Active Directory, existing domain with the Microsoft Azure with the PaaS service. If you wanted to extend the domain, then you should have a same infrastructure on Microsoft Azure. So let me explain into the another diagram. See, you can have a same infrastructure, and then you can extend your existing Active Directory into the Microsoft Cloud. So this is your on-prem. Okay, and this is your Azure. This is your Azure AZ-104. Okay. So any question till into the first scenario, second scenario? Any question, any doubt till? Okay, no question. Okay, no issues. So let's go into the portal and we'll discuss how we can deploy the infrastructure. So for the better management, what we are going to do now, we are going to deploy one virtual machine. But before that, first we'll design the network. So let's deploy the resource group, and I'm going to deploy resource group as a, let's see, domain services, Active Directory domain services. Under the East-US, let's create. Now I'm going to define one network, okay, and we'll have a separate subnet to deploy that particular service. Okay, so this is the recommendation. This is the best practices we are going to use. So let's deploy one VNet. So let's see, 192.168.0.0/16. So I'm going to configure first subnet, which is ADDS subnet. 1.0/24, and I'm going to deploy one more subnet, which is management subnet. Under management subnet, we will deploy that particular machine, okay, management machine, which is 2.0. And let's review and create. So we'll understand into the diagram as well, then you will get the better clarity. So what we are going to do now, this is my Azure infrastructure. This is Azure infrastructure. Into the Azure infrastructure, we have deployed one VNet. This is the Azure VNet. VNet 192.168.0.0/16, and that particular VNet is getting segregated into the two subnets. Okay, so this is my ADDS subnet, which is 192.168.1.0/24, and this is a management subnet, which is 2.0. So into the ADDS subnet, we are going to deploy a Active Directory, Azure Active Directory domain services. Azure Active Directory domain services we are going to deploy. So under that particular service, what Microsoft is doing, Microsoft is deploying 2 domain controllers for us, but we cannot see those domain controllers. Okay, so those domain controllers Microsoft is going to deploy in the backend. Okay, so from that particular range, Microsoft will pick up the IP addresses. So what will be the IP address? 1.4 and 1.5. So 1.4 and 1.5 will act as a DNS as well. 1.4 and 1.5 will act as Active Directory. 1.4, 1.5 will act as a DNS as well. So this is the primary DNS. This is a secondary DNS. And both virtual machines are getting created with the availability set. So if you remember, initially we have discussed, right? Availability set. So Microsoft is going to deploy a particular components with the redundancy model. So if anything goes wrong with the first Active Directory, all your infrastructure will run into the second Active Directory. Okay, so this is the PaaS service. As we discussed, this is the PaaS service. And again, Microsoft is not going to provide any RDP access of those Active Directory server. So under the management subnet, what we are going to do, we are going to deploy one Windows machine, Windows server, and we are going to deploy AD management tool, DNS management tool, okay, then group policy management tools. Okay, so those tools we are going to deploy, and we are going to join that virtual machine into our domain. So here we are going to configure that domain with, let's see, lab.com, lab.local, let's see, lab.local, and that particular virtual machine we are going to join into the lab.local. So let's take an example. This is your management VNet. This is your management VNet, and you have multiple VNets in the backend. This is your production VNet. This is your test VNet, and this is your, let's see, development VNet. So prod VNet, development VNet, and this is your, let's see, QA VNet. Okay, so all the VNets are getting paired with your management VNet. This is a VNet pairing. This is a VNet pairing. VNet pair, VNet pairing, VNet pairing. Okay, so if you deploy an instance under production, if you deploy the instance under the production, if you deploy the instance under production, so those instances can be a join into the Active Directory by using the VNet pairing. So you need to configure some DNS as well here. You need to configure the DNS, and then you can join all the virtual machines into the domain controller. So any question till any question, any doubt till?
Yogesh, Irfan here.
Yeah, Irfan, yes.
So let's consider I have on premises as you the two are physical your or a VM instance on your infra at on prem. Right?
Okay.
AD servers. Now, for example, we have that 192 subnet, 192.168. Okay.
Right.
Now, these are physical servers which are on-prem. The primary one is also on the on-prem. Now, as we create a domain controller, additional domain controller on Azure. Right. So as it is, when you once you create all your that should be part of your on-prem infra only, because the same subnet should get matched over here, right? Like
Right,
192 168 is there, so
right,
let's
right.
say it should not overlap your subnets, right, according to
Exactly.
the rule,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
So in that case, uh, how can I choose that subnet from the Azure infra, so that it can definitely there will be a firewall in between, which should be opened between AD to AD communication, right?
Right,
As
right,
per the
right.
Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, it says that there should not be any ports blocked between AD to AD communication.
Agree, agree.
So the
Yes.
security comes into picture over here. They say we cannot open all the firewall. Then what is the
Right.
use of keeping the firewall if you are opening 1024265535?
Yes.
Okay, because that is the RPC communication where your AD communicates with the domain controllers.
Right, right, right.
So in such a case, now you are saying that okay, these availability set point of view, okay, means on the Azure cloud that is fine, because Microsoft will keep the redundancy not on the same within the
Mm-hmm.
data center, but not on the same hardware. Now
Mm-hmm.
this on-prem is 192 168, and let's say I'm taking a subnet of different, so
Right.
there's also a firewall in between. So how
So,
means
so what I explained here, Irfan, into the first scenario. Okay, so I do not have that particular diagram now. So if you wanted to extend the domain controller from existing infrastructure, okay, from on-prem to cloud-prem, so that particular service is not supported, which we are going to discuss here. So that particular service you can deploy as a fresh. Let's take an example. There is a new customer, there is a small customer, and they wanted to deploy the infrastructure. Okay, now that customer having two options, the customer having two scenarios. Either that customer can deploy a Windows machine on Microsoft Azure, and that Windows machine can be a promoted as a Active Directory. Okay, Active Directory and DNS, and then you can manage your identity management, or you can manage your authentication mechanism. But let's take an example. My client is saying like, I do not have anyone to manage the Active Directory. So in such scenarios, Microsoft is promoting the PaaS service, which is your PaaS service, platform as a service, where Microsoft is configuring, deploying, managing, monitoring your Active Directory. Okay, and you are going to use only Active Directory features. But when you take the example of your enterprise, okay, from the enterprise scenario, so this is the infrastructure, right? So let me have a same diagram. Copy. So this is my on-prem, right? My Active Directory is running here, and what you're asking here, like we can extend the domain control, right? So, so this is a first scenario. Okay, you can extend the domain controller into the Microsoft Azure by using the same concept: infrastructure as a service, infrastructure as a service. So both Windows machines you are going to manage, both Active Directories you are going to manage, both DNS you are going to manage it. Okay, all the control you have, okay, in your hand to manage the infrastructure. But in second scenario, what I wanted to explain, so if you have a on-prem infrastructure with the traditional Active Directory, with the Windows and Active Directory and DNS, and if you are planning to extend that domain controller on Microsoft Azure, with PaaS services. ADDS, okay, which is comes under PaaS services. So if you wanted to extend that domain controller with the PaaS services, which is not supported till date, okay, which is not supported. So if you wanted to deploy a PaaS services, so it should have a new domain with the new forest. You cannot extend from any infrastructure here. So what Microsoft is suggesting, Microsoft is asking to deploy or configure one more forest, one more domain here, and then you can have the trust between two domain controllers with your on-premises infrastructure. But still you are looking a extension of domain controller then you have to use a first scenario. Infrastructure as a service means VM you are going to deploy, virtual machine you are going to deploy, and then you can extend a domain controller. So is clear, Irfan, or any doubt?
Uh, uh, just if you could brief me again on
Uh-huh.
the infrastructure as a service. Let's say I am deploying on the Azure one more additional domain controller.
Right,
Okay.
right, right,
Uh, so in that case, I already have my domain on Forest on my on-prem,
right,
and now
right.
on to I want that. Okay, I want to put one additional domain controller on the cloud so that whatever cloud services are there or cloud they or whatever user login they can authenticate from that
From
cloud
that
domain
particular
controller,
machine only. Yes, yes.
right?
I
On that cloud domain controller, so that it is locally available there.
exactly,
If
exactly.
any
Just a minute.
between
Yeah,
the link,
just a minute. Yeah, yeah. Just a minute. Okay. So you are you wanted to deploy here one more domain controller. So what is the prerequisite then? What is the prerequisite? Virtual machine, right? So if you are going to extend your domain controller on Microsoft Azure, right? So this is, let's see, East US, and you wanted to extend a domain controller. So very prerequisite is the required component is your virtual machine, right? So you are going to deploy one virtual machine here, right? So when you deploy the virtual machine, then everything you are going to manage. You are going to manage antivirus, you are going to manage backup of that virtual machine, you are going to manage the Active Directory, you are going to manage the DNS as well. So till clear, Irfan? Itna clear hai?
yeah, that is clear.
Yes. Now what I wanted to explain here, what I wanted to highlight here. So that particular concept, that particular infrastructure comes under IaaS, infrastructure as a service, where you are going to manage the virtual machine, where you are going to manage the operating system, where you are going to manage Active Directory, DNS, antivirus, then backup, okay, backup of AD if you have, then other things also you are going to manage. But in my scenario, I do not have a skills to manage the Active Directory infrastructure. Okay, because I'm not from IT background. My customer is not from IT background. Okay. So what Microsoft is saying, in such small scenarios, you can deploy a Azure ADDS here. See, Azure ADDS, which is patch services. So, so for the time being, let's consider you do not have any on-premises infrastructure. You are going to deploy a new business on Microsoft Azure. This is the new infrastructure. So when you deploy that particular service, you are not going to manage a Windows. You are not going to manage the Active Directory. You are not going to manage the DNS. Everything managed by Microsoft. Okay. But as a user, as a client, just you are going to consume the Active Directory, DNS, group policy services from Microsoft with the same way which you are going to consume into the on premises infrastructure. जैसे आप on prem में करते हो, you are taking the RDP of Active Directory, you are creating the users, you are creating the groups, you are creating the group policies, you are adding the multiple DNS zones into the DNS, right? The same concept, same thing you are going to do with the Azure ADDS as well. But the what is the difference here? You are not going to manage the Windows machine and you are not going to manage the Active Directory, which is managed by Microsoft. Is clear or any question? Irfan?
So you mean to say that if I deploy Azure ADDS,
Ha ha.
okay,
Yes.
service, if I'm using Azure Active Directory service,
Ha ha.
so in such a case, uh, uh, but, that same domain I can use on the cloud. It will synchronize all my users, or do I need to? In short, my query is that whether Microsoft will support my on-prem Active Directory as it is, which is if I select Azure data structure, DNS or Active Directory services.
Mm-hmm.
So I have number of OUs, group policies, everything configured.
Right.
So let's say I take a system state backup. Can I restore that system state backup on Azure directory services?
Yeah, not required actually. So backup also managing from the Microsoft only. Okay, so let me explain into another way. You will get the idea, right? So there are three types: Windows Active Directory, Windows AD, which you are going to deploy on Windows Server, right? Windows Server, which is 2K12, 2K16, and 2K19, right? 2K19. So last week we have discussed one more concept, which is Azure Active Directory, right? So Azure Active Directory is specifically for a cloud authentication, right? For the cloud only. And Windows AD is mainly people are using for the on-premises, right? Also last week we have discussed a synchronization between Windows AD and Active Directory, right? Till clear? Sorry, Windows Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. Now there is a one more concept or one more service which Microsoft is offering, which is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Again, same thing. Windows server is required, but that Windows server managed by Microsoft. Managed by Microsoft. Okay. AD managed by Microsoft. DNS managed by Microsoft. So your first scenario and your third scenario, it remains same. But what is the difference? In first scenario, your team is managing the Windows. In second scenario, Microsoft is managing the Windows. That's it. There is no difference in first and second scenario. But what is the disadvantage or what is the limitation? Yes.
Yeah, Yogesh, I have a question actually.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying that we can create the additional domain controller on the Azure cloud, but then we need to create the VM and need to manage everything,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, yes,
But
yes. Why?
is it mandatory? Is it
Yes.
mandatory or is it recommended? Because if we create that additional domain controller on cloud, and if something went wrong with the our on-premises domain controller or forest, still we will face lots of issues for the communication for clients to communicate with the Azure domain controller. I mean,
No,
the
see.
domain controller which is created on the Azure cloud.
So see. Now again, you're talking on fourth or fifth scenario. Okay. Now you're talking on different scenario. Okay. Let me explain again one one more diagram. Okay. You will get the idea. See, this is your on-prem. This is your on-premises infrastructure. Everything is running here. Okay. Everything is running. All the application servers are getting integrated with the Windows and DNS, Windows AD and DNS. Everything is running here. Now you are planning to have here few services on Microsoft Azure. Okay. So you are deployed some servers here, Windows machines you are deployed, and there is a site to site VPN between two infrastructure. इसके बीच में आपका site to site VPN है. Okay. So site to site VPN you have between two infrastructure, and your on-prem infra can communicate with the cloud and cloud server can communicate with the on-premises infrastructure. So by using that site to site VPN, what you have configured, you have joined all the Windows machines into the domain, but that Windows domain is hosted on your on-premises infrastructure. ये आपने सारे VMs यहाँ पे ज्वाइन कर लिए, right? We'll go step by step. ये सारे VMs आपने ज्वाइन कर लिए. So initially you had only a few virtual machines. It works fine, but day by day you are deploying a multiple instances here. Okay, आप क्या कर रहे हैं? रोज यहाँ पे 10-15 VMs deploy कर रहे हैं. Now you are facing some problems, latency problem. Why? Because your site to site VPN and your all the virtual machines are authenticating from the Windows Active Directory, and which is deployed into the on-premises infrastructure. So till clear or any question? ये scenario understand हुआ आपका?
Yes.
Irfan, is clear first scenario?
Yeah.
हाँ, yes. So what you will face here, you will face the issue because यहाँ से क्या हो रहा है कि आपके पास let's see 200 servers है, right? ये सारे 200 servers authenticate यहाँ से हो रहे हैं, right? Every time your server is getting authenticate, your application is getting authenticate from the Windows machine, and that Windows is deployed on your on-premises infrastructure. So what you have decided to resolve that issue, you have decided to deploy or to extend the domain controller on Microsoft Azure platform. So आपने क्या किया, एक Windows machine build up किया यहाँ पे. Let's see Windows 2K12 only. Windows 2K12 deploy किया. ये आपका है, let's see lab.com. This is a single domain. And now you have decided to extend that domain controller into the Microsoft Azure. Again, ये भी आपका lab.com हो गया. Lab.com, right? This is a second scenario. Okay. So you have extended domain controller and you have configured site and services. You have configured DNS here, and you have joined virtual machine into the domain, which is your lab.com. So during the authentication, all the servers will get authenticate from that particular extended domain controller. इतना clear है? Second scenario. ये जितने भी servers यहाँ पे create करेंगे, हाँ, yes, please, yes.
We need to use this additional domain controller IP as a DNS IP for all these servers so that they can communicate locally here on the cloud.
Yes. Now you're on track. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So everything is running good. Your Active Directory replication is happening in a proper manner. Everything is replicating between Active Directory. You have opened a required ports as well into the firewall. Okay, और आपका replication चल रहा है. Okay, and you are using few servers on Microsoft Azure. You are using few servers on your on-premises infrastructure. Now, you need to understand third scenario. Let's go into the third scenario. Okay, so into the third scenario, let me delete the on-premises thing. Okay, into third scenario, I do not have any on-premises infrastructure. Okay, we'll go step by step. In third scenario, I do not have any on-premises infrastructure. I wanted to start my business. To start the business, I wanted to deploy few applications, few websites, but I do not have anyone to manage that particular Active Directory infrastructure. So in such scenarios, what Microsoft is recommending, Microsoft is asking to deploy a ADDS service. Okay, so as we discussed into the last scenario, कि मुझे यहाँ पे Active Directory extend करना है, तो मुझे क्या deploy करना पड़ेगा? Windows machine. But in third scenario, Windows machine not required. Directly, I can deploy ADDS service, which already we have discussed into the diagram. Okay, so ADDS service we need to deploy in the backend. Microsoft will deploy two Windows servers, okay, and Active Directory and DNS. So why Microsoft is deploying two servers? To maintain the redundancy, right? So that particular concept comes under PaaS. Let me note it down. Platform as a service.
But
yes.
in this third scenario, there is no domain controller, no forest available in the on-premises, right?
Exactly. Into the third scenario,
it is fresh requirement from the client.
Yes, this is a fresh requirement. Okay, and this is a we can say greenfield deployment. Okay, you do not have anything. You are going to start from the scratch. Okay, so in third scenario, आपके पास on-prem नहीं है और आपके पास कोई specialized knowledge भी नहीं है to manage the Active Directory things. Okay, so that's why you can go with the PaaS services where Microsoft is managing in the backend everything. Okay, the same console you will get, the same options you will get. Okay, we'll discuss into the lab. So any question into the third scenario? Any question till Irfan? Any question? Third scenario?
A third scenario is like that you are building from the scratch, right?
Building, yes. Into the third scenario, we are building from the scratch. In fourth scenario, again, you will get the more clarity, what I wanted to explain.
No, just
Okay, now go to the fourth scenario now. Okay, a fourth scenario है मेरे पास कि ये मेरा ऑन प्रीम चल रहा है. Okay, my on prem is running here. Into the on premises infrastructure, I have one Active Directory with the lab.com. Again, same thing, lab.local. Lab.local is running here. Everything is running. And again, I'm planning to extend my data center into the Microsoft Azure. MS Azure into the East US. Okay. So again, I have deployed few servers here, and I need a authentication mechanism for Microsoft infrastructure, right? So into the first scenario, already we have discussed, like we can extend the domain controller. To extend the domain controller, we need to deploy our Windows machine with the traditional way, which you are going to perform into the on premises. Everything you need to do the same, and then you can extend the domain controller into the Microsoft Azure. Now into the fourth scenario, I wanted to have here one more clarity. If you are asking, like I wanted to deploy here PaaS service, Azure ADDS, Azure ADDS, and can we extend the existing domain controller with the PaaS? Answer will be a no. Okay, आप अगर मुझे पूछते हो कि I have already lab.com, lab.local, which is running into the my on premises. I wanted to extend that domain controller in Microsoft Azure, but I don't want to use infrastructure as a services. I don't want to deploy virtual machine. Can I use the PaaS services which Microsoft is offering with ADDS? Answer will be a no. So this is a cross platform. This is a cross technology, we can say, infrastructure as a service, and into the Azure you are using platform as a service. Okay, but still your customer is asking, no, I wanted to deploy PaaS services only. I don't want to install here a Windows machine and domain controller. So there is another workaround. Okay, you can have a PaaS services with the different domain name. Let's say lab2.local, and you can create a trust between two domain controllers, and then your ADDS and your Windows Active Directory will communicate. So this is a different forest, different domain. This is a different forest, different domain. But you cannot extend your infrastructure as a service, means Windows Active Directory with the PaaS services. No. So is clear, or any question?
So the first scenario where you said that I can build a VM and promote it as a domain controller on a Azure, but
Right.
that entire will be managed by us only.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
But there will be a site-to-site VPN connectivity in between, right?
Right.
From on-prem to your Azure cloud,
Right.
right?
Right.
And if I take infrastructure as a service, Azure ADDS, so that is a cross-platform where I cannot use existing AD, DNS, whatever it is. Even
Right.
if I restore system, it will not work.
Right.
So that is a cross-platform. It is an
Right.
unsupported scenario by Microsoft.
Right.
However, if I want to use that, then I'll need to create a new forest, create a trust in between both of them.
Exactly. Yes. 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 Now you're on track. Yes. Yes.
Right. So here,
so might be in future, Microsoft will provide that particular scenario into the ADDS, where you can extend on-prem to cloud.
So I just wanted one 2 points. This trust between them, be external trust or a full trust?
Both trust you can have. So all the feature is supported. So trust feature is supported. Okay, as per your requirement, you can have all type of trust between two domains.
Because if we do a full trust, then probably the risks are more because that is generally not allowed by security.
Yes, yes. So
External trust,
it
so
depends on
one-way
your
trust.
business. Yes, yes. It depends on the business as well. If business is going to allow, then no issues. If business is not going to allow, then you can have only the one-way trust.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the next
Yeah,
point.
wait,
Yes.
1 minute. So the on-premises users and I mean the both users on the cloud and on-premises, they can log in into both domains. Just switch
Yes.
the domain and they can log in there, right?
Yes.
If we
Yes.
created the trust.
Yes.
But why we need this Azure ADDS?
No, 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 no. Azure AD, see, I'm talking on multiple scenarios. So your question is why we need it, because I don't want to manage Windows machine, which is my Active Directory. Okay.
No, it's so okay, but we have suppose we have created servers which we required on the Azure cloud, and we
Uh-huh.
are managing all the applications and everything.
Yes, 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 no issues. See, just we have discussed a multiple scenario. Okay.
Okay,
So actually,
okay,
see, the fourth scenario people are not using into the industry, right?
okay.
People are
Yeah.
extending the domain controller, but main mostly you'll get the third scenario where a small customers are using that particular infrastructure where you do not have any expertise to manage the Active Directory. So in that scenario, you can have ADDS and you can manage your infrastructure.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now the next point I wanted to explain here how it works in the backend. So this is the infrastructure. So now what you need to assume, you do not have any on-premises infrastructure, and this is a small company. This is a small startup business, and they are going to deploy infrastructure on Microsoft Azure. Okay. So they have created one management VNet. Under management VNet, they have created two subnets. So my ADDS subnets is dedicated for the Active Directory infrastructure, which is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. And this is a management server I have created. On top of that, I'm going to deploy a few tools, management tools. And by using those tools, I can access my Active Directory, I can manage my Active Directory, and I can make some required changes, okay, for my infrastructure. So in the backend, again, I have created a multiple VNets, production VNet, development VNet, and QA VNet with the machine Windows infrastructure. So those machines also can be a join into the Active Directory. You need to configure the DNS. You need to add all the networks into the DNS, and then you can join. But before configuring or before joining the machines into the domain, you need to deploy, you need to create a VNet peering between your management VNet and your backend infrastructure, backend VNet. Okay. So I wanted to highlight here one more point, which is very important, like how it works in the backend. So into the last week, we have discussed Azure Active Directory as well. So let me break the diagram. And let's go into here. Okay. So in the backend, you have backend VNet. Okay. आपके पास यहाँ पे सारे backend VNet है. Backend VNets you have. Okay. Now how it works. So into the Azure only, you will get Azure Active Directory, right? आपको यहाँ पे और एक component मिलता है, which is Azure Active Directory. So now we are talking Azure AD. Okay. So when you deploy a Azure Active Directory domain services infrastructure, so by default, Microsoft is going to synchronize your ADDS service with your Azure Active Directory. So this is a default behavior. So default क्या होगा, ये Active Directory ये Azure AD के साथ synchronize करेगा. This is a default behavior of your ADDS service. So under the Azure Active Directory, you will get one group which is by default, okay, which is ADDS group. Which group I'm talking? ADDS. ADDS. ये group आपको by default मिलेगा. You can cross check in your subscription as well. Okay, during the lab, just go to the Azure Active Directory Let me demonstrate. Go to Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory, and under Azure Active Directory, go to the groups option, groups, and under group you will get one ADDS group. Okay, see ये आपका ADDC administrator group है, right? So that particular group is getting synchronized with your Windows Active Directory. See, this is a Windows Active Directory, but that Windows we are not going to manage. This is a Windows AD only, right? So ये group में अगर आप कोई user create करते हो, let's see user 1, so that user 1 is getting synchronized automatically with the Windows Active Directory. So that you can use to join your virtual machine into the domain. You can use that particular user to log in into the virtual machine as well via RDP once you provide the permissions. Okay. So any question till any doubt how it works, like how it works in the backend? Any question till? Okay. So let's go into the portal and deploy the infrastructure. Now we have created the VNets, right? And now we are going to deploy Azure ADDS service. So let's go into the portal. See, Azure AD domain services, Azure ADDS. Let's create a domain services. Resource group, ADDS, and now I can have any domain here. Let's see, lab.local. Okay, so this is my internal domain only. Region East US. Now Microsoft is offering a SKU as well, where standard, enterprise, and premium. So you can compare with your operating system, right? You will get the data center edition, you will get the standard edition. So with the same way, Microsoft is offering the 3 types here. And as per the type here, you can create a users, number of users and number of groups here. Okay. So I'm going to select a standard. This is the VNet which we have created, and I'm going to select here ADDS subnet, which is 192.168.1.0. Okay, so this is the very important part. What Microsoft is showing here is group will be notified when you have an alert of warning or critical severity. Okay, so all global administrator of the Azure AD directory, members of AADDC administrator groups. So all the groups are getting alerted here. Okay, if you have any issue. Into the next option, Microsoft is asking to synchronize. Okay, so all that particular group which we have discussed. So into the Azure Active Directory, go to the Azure Active Directory one more time. So my ADDS will get synchronized with the particular domain services. And let's create. Okay, now it will take around 1 hour to deploy. Okay, because in the backend, Microsoft is going to deploy 2 virtual machines. Microsoft is going to deploy 1 load balancer. Everything Microsoft is going to deploy in the backend. So it is taking time. So meanwhile, what we'll do, we'll deploy our infrastructure as we discussed into the diagram. So we'll create one Windows machine. We'll install a required tools on that machine, and once domain is ready, then we'll join that Windows machine into the Active Directory. But before that, we need to configure 1.4 and 1.5 as a DNS on that particular machine. So 192.168 1.4 1.5 as a DNS. Okay, and then we can join that virtual machine into the domain. So let's deploy one more virtual machine. Go to home, virtual machine. So before that, I'll create a one more resource group. Create. Okay, let's deploy the virtual machine. Management. Then this is my management server. Windows to gateway R2. And I'm going to deploy virtual machine under the management VNet only. Sorry, our DC 400 VNet under the management subnet. That's it. Okay, so machine also getting deployed. So what we'll do, we'll configure a DNS here, which is 1.4 and 1.5, and then we'll reboot the machine. So still go to the virtual machine. Okay, so let's create one network security group we are not created during the VM deployment. NSG. let's enable the RDP here. Services will be the RDP 3389. Okay, so this is the server which we have deployed. Now we have public IP, and we need to configure the 1.4 and 1.5 as a DNS server. Okay, because in the backend Microsoft is deploying the DNS, and Microsoft will use 1.4 and 1.5. So go to the network interface and configure the DNS. 192.168.1.4 and 1.5. Save. Okay, so we have configured the custom DNS as well, and let's connect to the virtual machine. Okay, so let's install the features. Okay, so I wanted to install group policy management. Then I wanted to manage okay, remote server administration tools. Under that there is option ADDS management tools. Okay, where we can manage the Active Directory. Next, install. Okay, so we have installed required tools here, control panel, administrative tools, and we can see all the required options here. See, Active Directory, site and services, user computers, group policy management. So DNS also we need to add. Okay, let me add the DNS management tool here. DNS server tool here. Let's install. Okay, so once that infrastructure is getting deployed, configured, then we can join the Windows machine into the domain. Let me check the DNS details. Okay, IP config. Okay, IP config /all. So now I can see here 1.4 and 1.5 is my DNS server. Okay, so what needs to be done now? We'll have a user act. So as we discussed into the diagram, right? As we discussed into the diagram, like we can have the user here. Okay, let's go into the last diagram. Okay, so we'll create one user under the ADDS group under the Azure Active Directory, because Microsoft is not asking any ID and password during that particular infrastructure deployment, right? So what we need to do, we need to create one user under the ADDS group, and that user will get replicate into the Windows Active Directory, and that user we can use to join our Windows machine into the domain. Okay, so let's go into the portal, Active Directory. So groups. Okay, let's go into the user. Let's create a new user. So username will be, let's see, lab admin. Lab admin. Okay, so password is getting generated here. Password is getting generated. Okay, now I need to select here that particular group, because that group is going to synchronize with the Microsoft Windows Active Directory. So select that group. That's it. Let's create it. So lab admin we have created. So lab admin ID we are going to use that machine during the domain joining. Okay, so this is ID and this is the password. So as the default behavior, we need to change the password, because during the first login Microsoft is asking to change the password here. So let's use that particular next, and this is the password. Sign in. So old password, new password. Okay, so we have changed the password as well. Sign out. Okay, so it will take time. So we'll take a 15-20 minute break and then we'll continue with our next topics. Okay, which is Azure private and public DNS, and then we'll understand how we can join Windows 10 machine, laptop, desktop device to the Azure Active Directory. So any question till any doubt? Irfan, any question from your side? Any question? Any doubt till? Samir, any question? Vishnu, any question? Okay, so we'll back in 15 minutes and then we'll continue the next topics. Okay, which we are planning to cover DNS and Windows joining with the Azure Active Directory.
Yogesh? Hello, Yogesh?
Okay, so can we start? So still ADDS is in deployment, okay, is in progress. So now we'll try to understand Azure private and public DNS. Okay, so let's go into the diagram. Azure private. So first we'll understand the private DNS only. So same thing again, we need to understand from on-premises infrastructure and from cloud as well. So into the on-prem, like we are deploying a Windows machine. We are deploying Windows server here. Windows server. And into the Windows server, we are deploying the Active Directory. So Active Directory part we have covered, right? Now we are going to discuss on DNS part. Okay, so DNS again. So like into the on-premises infrastructure, people are deploying the DNS servers. Okay, again same thing. Windows team is managing the Windows, and your Active Directory DNS team is managing the DNS. With the same way, a same DNS you can have on Microsoft Cloud as well with the same algorithm. Like you are deploying one Windows machine, you are deploying one Windows machine, and top of that Windows machine, we can have a DNS server. Windows server, and then we are going to deploy a DNS here. Okay, so after putting the DNS, after deploying the DNS, then the complete infrastructure, all servers, are communicating with the Windows and resolution. For the resolution, we are using the DNS server. So what Microsoft is saying here, instead of a Windows machine with the DNS, Microsoft is asking to deploy a DNS service. Again, the DNS service comes under platform as a service. Okay, so Windows, no need to deploy any Windows machine. Okay, no need to deploy any Windows machine. Just we need to deploy a DNS server with domain name. Domain name, and then we can have the infrastructure, we can have the virtual machine, and we can create a records into the DNS. So once you create a record into the DNS, all virtual machines will communicate with each other by using the name. Okay, because this is the DNS we are going to use, because all the virtual machines means as a infrastructure, as an architect, your virtual machines are communicating with the VNet. This is my VNet. This is the VNet service. So all virtual machines are integrated with the virtual network. Okay, and VNet you are going to integrate with the DNS service. Means when you deploy a virtual machine under that network, automatically Microsoft will create a record into the DNS. Okay, so Microsoft will generate a record automatically when you spin up the virtual machine. Okay, so let's deploy a DNS and we'll deploy the virtual machine. Then you will get the understanding. So now ADDS infrastructure, we are going to deploy into the East US, and DNS we will deploy into the West US. So let's go into the resource group, create the resource group. Let's see DNS into the West US too. Okay. Okay, so DNS resource group we have created. Let's deploy first virtual machine, or we can deploy directly DNS here. So DNS. So there are two options: DNS zones and private DNS zones. So DNS zones are nothing but your public DNS. Okay, where you can integrate with your public A records. Okay, so we'll understand both scenario. So first we'll focus on private DNS. DNS as a resource group name. Let's see .com. Okay, so this is the domain name. Next, and create it. Okay, so DNS we have deployed here. Now let's go into the options. See, from the record set we can create a required record. See, A record, then CNAME, MX, PTR, server record, text record. So those records can be created under that particular domain. So currently we do not have any virtual machine, or currently we do not have any VNet. So as we discussed into the diagram, my VNet is getting integrated with the DNS service, right? So let's go and create a one VNet, or will deploy one virtual machine. So during the VM deployment, automatically Microsoft will deploy the VNet, and then we'll integrate that VNet with the DNS service. So let's go into the virtual machine. We'll have one more virtual machine. Management DNS1, which is into the waste ES2. App server, Windows 2K12, admin 100. Okay, see, Microsoft is creating here a DNS, which is 10.0.0.4/24. Okay, so that particular that particular VNet and subnet we will integrate with the our DNS service. Deploy the VM. Any question till? Any doubt? Pallavi, any question? Irfan, any question? Vishakha, any question?
No, Yogesh.
So, but you're getting the things right? What we are discussing?
Yeah.
So those services needs to be used, okay, as per your requirement. Okay, so VM we have deployed. Now let's log in into the virtual machine. Okay, so let's go into the DNS which we have created, DNS service, and into the DNS service we are going to integrate our virtual network. Okay, so this is my VNet, then this is the virtual network TC0400. Okay, so that particular network we are going to integrate, and there is option enable auto registration. So when you click here, automatically Microsoft will create a record, okay, of the virtual machines which is created under that particular VNet. So if you have 100 machines, 100 servers, so Microsoft will create 100 A records automatically. And after that, when you deploy the virtual machine under that network, again the entry is getting created automatically. So currently, if you see, there is no A record, right? Go to overview tab. There is no A record for our server. So into virtual machine tab, you can see the virtual machines. So this is the app server, right? App server we have deployed under the WasteOS 2, and there is no A record created for app server. So let's go to the virtual network, integrate with the virtual network, enable auto registration. Okay. Okay, so we have added the VNet here, and now let's go into the overview. See, the A record is getting created automatically. App server A record. Okay, and this is the local IP address of the server. So what is the benefit you will get here? The benefit here is like you are not going to manage the Windows machine. Okay, just you are going to deploy a DNS patch service, and by using that patch service, you can use a name of the server into your applications. So go to the server now. What is the domain name? Which is my appserver.test.com. So that particular service you can use for the Linux infrastructure, because Linux machines you are not going to join into the domain, right? But you are going to use, or you are going to create a record into the DNS. So in such small infrastructure or into the DNS infrastructure, you can have a DNS patch service and you can manage your infrastructure. So go to the CMD. See, when I ping appserver.test.com, so automatically I'm getting the response from 10.0.0.4. So any question till, any doubt with the private DNS? Any question till?
Yogesh,
Yes.
what is the use of record?
So that when you create a records here, okay, you can use a name of the server, okay, into the applications. So no need to use the IP address of the server.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the best practice into the production as well. Like people are not integrating applications with the IP address. They are using the name. Okay. And that AD, your A record is getting created under the DNS. Okay. So everything you can manage with the name only.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the private DNS. So let's configure the public DNS. Okay. So private DNS mainly people are using, okay, into the internally only. Okay. You cannot publish the infrastructure outside. If you wanted to publish the infrastructure into the outside, then you have to configure the public DNS. So again, there are multiple ways to configure the public DNS. Okay, so we'll go step by step and we'll understand the concept here. So this is the private DNS and let's delete the zone. Okay, so before deleting, let's delete the required entries. Delete, and we can delete the DNS. Okay. So let's go into the DNS again and configure the public DNS. Okay, now what is the difference between private DNS and public DNS? Into the private DNS, we can use any name, but into the public DNS, we have to use a registered domain name only. So if you are configuring xyz.com, yes, you can, but you cannot publish the infrastructure outside. So if you wanted to publish the infrastructure outside, in that scenario, your name should be registered into the registrar. Okay. So if in our scenario, see into our scenario, we are going to use cloudtechno.co.in domain. So cloudtechno.co.in is a registered domain. So let's create a DNS zone here. DNS and cloudtechno.co.in. This is my registered domain. Let's create it.
So, query, Yogesh.
Yes, yes, please.
So, as we use ADDS service on the Azure platform, so by default it has an internet access, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So then we'll need to create a rule to block that internet access so that it is not exposed over there, right?
Right. Yeah, just give me 1 minute, okay? I'm getting the call from office. Just a minute. Okay, so let's go into the DNS here. and now we can create a records, and those records can be created under the cloud.techno.co.in domain. So let's understand a scenario, like in which scenario we need to use that particular infrastructure. So let's take an example. You have enterprise scenario, and you have multiple domains you have registered into the godaddy.com, and every time you're going to log in into the GoDaddy portal to create a records. Okay, and also in some scenario you do not have access, okay, to log in into the GoDaddy portal and to create a records or some required records. Okay, so what is the recommended here? What you can do, instead of that particular DNS, you can use a Microsoft DNS here, and those name servers, those DNS server can be integrate with your GoDaddy DNS first. Okay, so let me explain. So those 4 DNS Microsoft is offering. So let's go here. So this is the GoDaddy infrastructure, right, where we have configured the DNS, sorry, domain name, and we have 4 servers, right? 4 domain servers, 4 name server Microsoft is offering here. Okay. Now I wanted to make some changes into the cloud.techno.co.in DNS. Okay, this is my DNS. So every time I need to log in into the portal and I need to do the changes. So instead of what Microsoft is saying, Microsoft is asking to deploy a public DNS service. Public DNS service. So when you deploy public DNS service, Microsoft is offering 4 DNS servers. So those 4 DNS servers we have added under our GoDaddy DNS under the cloud.techno.co.in, and then we can have all the DNS records under the DNS service only. So let's take an example. I wanted to publish one server as a web server. So I can create a record. So let's see my app 200.cloudtechno.co.in. So what is the public IP of our server? So this is the public IP. This is the public IP, and let's say OK. Okay, so when you hit on that particular link or that particular name, automatically you will get your server. Okay, but in our scenario we have not deployed any IIS. Okay, so that's why we'll not get any page, but when we deploy IIS, automatically you will get your web server here or web application. So any question till any doubt?
So, but across globally to replicate any record, it takes 24 to 48 hours, right?
Right. So this is a normal behavior. Yeah, 48 hours. So as per Google, okay, it will take 48 hours. Okay. So we'll wait some time, okay, because it will take some time to deploy the infrastructure, and then we'll understand that particular scenario. So still it is in deployment phase only. Okay. So we'll wait some time. Okay. Okay, now it is showing in running mode. Okay, let me refresh once. Okay, now let's go into our management server quickly, and we can try to join that machine into the domain. Manage. So what is the domain name? See, under the properties, see 1.4, 1.5 is the IP address. Okay. What is the domain name? Lab.local. So domain lab.local. Okay. What is the user ID we have created? The user ID is lab admin. Okay. See here and reboot the virtual machine now. Let's start it. Let's log in into the virtual machine. And now I can log in into the machine by using the domain account. Okay. What is the domain name? lab/lab admin and password. And I can use all the required option. Go to the control panel. Administrative tools. Users and computers. See, this is my lab.local. This is my domain controller. So if we see under domain controllers, see Microsoft has deployed 2 servers in the backend for us into the redundancy model. Okay, so we can see here like all the details, but we cannot log in into those machines. Okay, so in the backend, when we check into the resource group, let's go into the resource group, DNS, sorry, ADDS, and under ADDS, we can see all the components Microsoft has created. Lab.local, which is my domain service, right? But there is no virtual machine. Virtual machine Microsoft has created in the backend. Okay, that's why we cannot see the virtual machine. So any question till, any doubt till? Any question, any doubt till? Irfan, any question? Any question, any doubt into the DNS?
So this is the new Active Directory services we have deployed on the Azure infrastructure, right?
Right.
So this is built from the scratch, means there is
Yes.
no on-prem this thing.
Right. Okay, so any question till, any doubt? If no question, then uh, we can stop here, okay, for the day, and we can have a class with tomorrow as well. So tomorrow we'll focus on a backup part, and meanwhile we'll understand how to join Windows 10 machine into the domain. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I will share the new meeting invite, okay, for tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Yogesh, I'll give you a call.
Yes, sure.